So in general, some universities define it as analysis chapter, some define as findings chapter, some define it as results chapter. And some universities divide it into two, results as a separate chapter and discussion as a separate chapter. But in our case, we normally say it's results and discussion together. So don't get it confused. It depends on the requirement of the particular university. So in our case, we normally define it as results and discussion, the fourth chapter. So your first chapter is introduction, second one is literature review, and third one is methodology, and fourth one is results and discussion, and fifth one is conclusion. I think you have already gone through all the other chapters because we already have conducted those sessions. So just to give some understanding about your idea about the research and all that, can somebody just brief me what do you think results chapter is? How do you define what are the things that you want to report under that chapter in your opinion? So we don't have right and wrong answers, but what I just want your opinion on that. Nobody?
Result section has the findings of our research based on the methods we have used to do the research.
Okay, so that is a good one. Any other ideas?
We can find out the answers for our hypothesis.
Right. Okay. Any other ideas?
Based on the findings, the data that we collect, we analyze the data, and we establish the relationships that we're trying to test in our hypothesis.
Right.
And
So
compare it with the previous literature and give a conclusion.
right. So we get some idea. I'm so glad that you speak up. So the first of all, now we are supposed to discuss about results and discussion chapter. So in my outline, I have divided it into two. So first we would discuss about results section, then we would go for the discussion section. So in the results section, as you can see, I hope that you all can see the screen that I have shared. Is it visible for you?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so in this presentation, if you go through it, you can see I have mentioned something here. So the results chapter in a dissertation or a thesis or any form of academic research for that matter, it's really is where you objectively and neutrally, very important two words, objectively and neutrally present and describe the finding of your analysis or analysis. So the more we have important two words here, right? Like you can see. I want to emphasize on four words: objectively, neutrally, present, and describe. So very important things that you should remember when we are dealing with the results section. So what we do here is basically we just objectively and neutrally. So as a researcher, maybe you might have a lot of idea about the research that you do. So therefore, we should not jump into conclusion at this moment. When we are reporting on our results, what we should do is we should objectively present them and neutrally present them and describe. So what what are the things that we are not going to do is basically we just not going to interpret any data here. We are not going to interpret any output, any information that we get. It's just, clear cut presentation and description about the findings. That's it, right? So as I mentioned here, so it does not link them back to the literature or research question or any other research problem or any other uh, research question for that matter. So what we just do here is just present and describe the findings. That's all. We are not particularly linking them to the literature, because linking that into the literature is coming in the next section, which is the discussion section. So here we are talking about results section. In the results section, we are not going to do that. In the results section, only thing that we do, objectively and neutrally present and describe the finding of the analysis. So that's what we are supposed to do. So that exactly is a results or finding or analysis chapter supposed to look like, right? So that is it. So this results chapter or results section, also referred as the finding section, sometimes analysis section, as I mentioned. So it's again, I should mention that it's one of the most important chapters also in your dissertation or whatever the academic writing, as it shows the reader what you have found, right, in terms of maybe qualitative or quantitative data you collected, and it presents the data using clear maybe text, maybe narratives, maybe tables, graphs, charts, right? Depending on what you do, whether it is qualitative or quantitative, right? So in doing so, it also specifically highlight any potential issues, such as sometimes outliers, unusual findings, things like that. All right, so that's very important. So as I mentioned, now we are dealing with two separate sections here, results and discussion. So how do you differentiate between those two sections is also one of the important thing to discuss, right? So well, the results chapter, as we mentioned, you only presents your data. It's just a presentation and description of your data. We are not going to do any interpretation of the findings. That interpretation part is going to be come under, it's going to be coming under discussion chapter. So that's the basic difference, right? So I hope that you get the idea. So then and there, if you have any clarification, please let me know, so I will explain it. And moving in the presentation, so you can see, as I mentioned, so I have structured my presentation this way, like, because discuss whatever the chapter we are talking about, results chapter, purely depend on the way that you write it, purely depend on your analysis method. If you have selected qualitative, if you have selected quantitative, so the way that you should present your or way that you should present and describe your findings is quite different, because anyway the data set is quite different. So therefore, first let me move into the quantitative research area, and then if we have somebody here that who is doing a qualitative research, probably we would discuss about that also. So can somebody tell me the difference between quantitative and qualitative, quali and quant, the difference when it comes to type of data? Anyone? I think you should have understanding about the difference here at the moment, because now you have I hope that you will have at least collected the data or maybe finalize the questionnaire at the moment. Any answers?
Quantitative data.
Yes.
Qualitative research is a descriptive research. Quantitative research shows the interrelationship between dependent and independent variables.
Okay. So in terms of data, what is the difference?
Quantitative has measurements. Qualitative is mostly from interviews, observations.
Right. So very valid answers. Any other answer?
Quantitative the research collects data in numerical terms
Okay.
that can be measured, and qualitative is all based on expressions, feelings. The data is not quantifiable.
Right. Any other ideas or opinions?
Primary data used for the quantitative and published data for the qualitative research.
Is it published data for the qualitative research? Right. Anyway, so as you all mentioned, so let me summarize it now. Quantitative data are more straightforward sort of type of data where we can measure them using numbers. All right. So mostly we do analyze quantitative data through statistical methods. Right. So the difference between quantitative qualitative is where the qualitative data more tend to describe the feelings and the context and the deep meaning of the expression, right, rather than numbers. So basically qualitative data collect, I mean, as a qualitative researcher, we collect data in terms of text, interview transcripts, and maybe images, videos, stories, recordings like that. So the mainly quantitative data, if you think about it, is used to sort of generalize the findings, where qualitative data is used to understand the problem in very deep level, right? So it's like qualitative is like on the surface, quantitative is like, going deep, but surface is very narrow but going deep. But it is not the case that we are going to discuss today. But anyway, we have to have sort of understanding what exactly qualitative, what exactly quantitative is. So moving into the quantitative first. So let me discuss something about it, but before that I want to make a little bit of a adjustment to my PowerPoint slide. So please do pardon me. Give me 1 second. Right. Right. So I have reshared my screen. Can you all see this? I hope all you can.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So let me go into this quantitative one first. So since most of you are doing quantitative research, So here I have structured my presentation or our discussion in such a way that first we discussed what exactly quantitative research, so what are things that we should uh, present in a results chapter or results section of the dissertation. So the first thing that you should present is the introduction. Then we can present some sample demographics. After that, we have to present something related to the validity and reliability of your instrument. Then you can present descriptive statistics. After that, we can go for inferential statistics. Then we can move into the hypothesis testing. Then you should include a concluding summary. So this is the basic structure of your results chapter. So let me repeat it again, starting with an introduction, then sample demographics, after that validity and reliability, then descriptive statistics, then inferential statistics, then hypothesis testing, ultimately concluding summary. So let us go one by one. First, I would like to go into the introduction part, right? So under the introduction, what are the things we should mention, right? So that's what I'm going to discuss here, right? So under the introduction, the first thing that you should do is actually we have to revisit our research question, because in the first chapter itself, that is the introduction chapter of the dissertation, we have thoroughly discussed about the research problem, background, objectives, questions, and all that, right? So therefore, since this is the research chapter, now when a reader goes through your report, he first read the first chapter, then come into the literature review, then come into the methodology, then only you are getting into the results section. So we need to have a sort of a connection to the introduction chapter. So in order to remind the reader about the main purpose and the research question and the objective of the research, first we have to add a statement or small paragraph mentioning or briefly explaining the purpose and the objective of the research, why we just conducted this one, and brief discussion of the type of data we collected and the data collection method and the instrument, and if we have any assumptions or hypothesis, those. So it's just a brief paragraph. We are not going to write much. So we are not going to introduce our research all over again here, because we have already done that in the introduction part. So here the purpose is to just to remind the reader about the research purpose and the objectives. So that's the idea. Okay, so I hope you get exactly what we should do, right? So at this stage, it is also useful to think about the key points that you want to raise in the discussion also, right? Those things need to be taken into the account, right? So then, as the second point, what we should do is we have to provide brief overview of what we are going to do in this chapter or the section. So sort of a structure. So first paragraph should be about it's more like a summary of the whole research taken into a small paragraph, like, you know, what is the research, main purpose of the research, objectives, questions, and what sort of methodology, the design, type of data collection, instrument, and any other functions, sort of a very small paragraph. Then we should provide in the next paragraph a brief overview of the structure of the chapter itself. Chapter in the sense the results chapter or the results section, right? So that is very important one. So again, this introduction part should not be very lengthy one. A paragraph or two would do the thing. So we should not go beyond that. A paragraph or two would be more than enough, like, you know, maybe a page, a half a page, probably more than enough. So it's just to give the reader a starting point to anchor into the, you know, results chapter. So that's the basic idea. As I mentioned in the last point here, the aim is to simply to give the reader a heads up about what you will cover, or what we are going to cover in this session, what he should expect in this particular section. So that is it, right? So very important. So then that is introduction part of the discussion, sorry, results section. So then moving into the second part, that is sample demographics. So in here, what we expect the most is actually to provide some data, about your target population, about your sample, an overview of the sample demographics. So that is the second part of the results section, right? So as I mentioned, what age range are they? How is the gender distributed? How is the ethnicity distributed? What areas do participants live? The location, their occupation. If it is about employees, employee category, their work experience, education level, right? So why we should first produce this sort of information at the beginning of the results chapter is very important. Why? Because we should first give the little bit of idea, essence about the context that we are doing this research. So the reader should understand that the sample set that we have selected and the characteristics of the sample, and reader should be convinced that this sample is actually a good representative of the population that we are talking about. So that's why we are providing this sort of information to convince the reader that the sample that we took was scientific, and it is actually it actually represents the total population that we are aiming at, because we are doing this most of the time. Quantitative research is being done so that we go for bigger samples, so that we expect to sort of generalize the outcome of the research, or the conclusion or the findings of the research. So that's one of the idea, right? So therefore we need to present this data to assess how representative the sample is for the broader population, right? So as I mentioned, this is important for the sake of generalizability. You know what exactly that I'm talking about, so that we can generalize it to the total population, so that our finding would be more valid and accurate. Because if your sample is not representative of the population, you will not be able to sort of generalize into the sample, and the validity and the rigor of the findings of your research is quite less. It is considered as a limitation, right? So therefore, let me go one by one here. So first we have age distribution. So I have several examples here, which I have taken from some of the published research. So you can go through that, the way that you should sort of present those data in your research chapter, right? So another important thing about this demographics or the sample demographic is it helps us to sort of contextualize our finding. So in which context that we should explain our findings, what sort of characteristics that we are dealing with in our population and in our sample, right? So therefore it is so important for a reader or for a researcher to understand about the present demographics data of the sample, right? Okay, so let me go one by one here. I have given some examples. So if you have any questions, you can already ask them. So I have first one here we have is gender distribution. The way that I have presented here, you can see gender as well as the marital status all together I have presented. So when you are presenting your data, you have to think of creative way of presenting them. So when you think about data, you have to think about what sort of presentation tool I should use. Whether is it a table, is it a pie chart, is it a graph, or whether is it a bar chart, what sort of a chart, whether is it a line chart, is it a scatter plot I should use. So what sort of an infographic I should use in order to give the most meaning for the data that I am presenting. That is a very important thing. So here you can see the way that we have presented the gender and the marital status. You can see it is presented in a sort of pie chart. So because we do not have so many categories, like in marital status, we have only two at the moment, single and married. And in gender, we have only mentioned two here as well, female and male. So you can see the way that it is presented. So anybody can just anybody who is going through the sections can just glimpse up these infographics and get the idea. So what sort of distribution when it comes to age and marital status, right? So please do mind about the way that it is presented, because always it should be, you should label them, you should give them a name. You can see underneath the chart I have mentioned figure 4.1 because it is the first chapter. So then we have figure 4.2, that is for gender, and source is also given, survey data 2017, because survey was conducted in 2017 for this particular research. So in your case, you have to mention your the year that you have conducted your survey. That is also one of the valuable information that you should present. Right. So this is basically gender distribution. So then we have age distribution. So you can see I have given some categories of age, like, from 20 to 30, 31 to 40, 41 to 50, and then total. And the frequencies are given, percentages given, and cumulative percentages also given. So this way also you can present your age distribution. And then you can present your education level like this. Now the percentage as well as the frequency also given. Sort of this is like, sort of a bar chart. You can see the level of education is given: A level, diploma, bachelor's degree, master's degree. So you should think about a creative way of presenting data so that the person who is going through it, reading the 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 the, the project or whatever the research, should be able to understand what you are presenting very quickly. So that is the basic idea. So the experience is also given in a sort of bar chart here. So that's the main idea. So when you are, and please be mindful about these things also. Now you can say I have only given you the infographic, but whatever the infographic you present in the research, you should always describe it, right? So don't just get away by only presenting the figure, like infographic, but you have to sort of describe what you have presented, right? For example, now we need to sort of mention why this for example here, female 27, male 73, why male is high, how this percentage of gender, or maybe let's say the gender distribution is sort of representative of the population we are looking at. Likewise, we have to always sort of describe what you present, right, under this demographic section, right? So I hope that you got the idea what we should do under sample demographics. So basic idea here is actually convince the reader that we have a good representation of our population, right? Good representation of our population. So moving into the next one, that is validity and reliability. Very important two things. Can somebody just mention or maybe just explain to me what do you mean by these two terms, validity and reliability? Anybody? Any idea? What do you mean by validity? Please, I need some feedback from you. Otherwise, it's quite boring to, do this lecture. Anyone has an idea?
Any given period time or any measurement time period?
In general sense, what do you mean? Not in general sense, actually. So when it comes to research, these two words are very important. So validity, let me explain it to you by using an analogy of a clock. Now, if you have a clock at the moment, if that clock shows you the right time, if that clock shows you the right time at the moment, we can say it's valid, it's accurate, the validity is good. That means now if now the time is 6 p.m., if this clock shows that the time is exactly 6 p.m. according to the clock also, that means that clock is, the validity of that clock is quite high, right? But the reliability is like every time when it is 6 p.m. the clock should show 6 p.m. Reliability is more towards the consistency, right? So even though if it is not valid, it could reliable, even though for example now exactly the time is 6, but the clock shows that time is 6:10, but every time it shows 6:10 at that moment, that means it's reliable. Reliability means the consistency. Validity means actually the accuracy. How accurate is it and how consistent is it? So is it in the sense I am talking about the instrument we are using. So since we are dealing with the quantitative analysis, so here we are dealing with questionnaires. questionnaires is one of the broadly used instrument in quantitative research. So when it comes to questionnaire, we need to check validity and reliability. So let me go one by one here. So how we are going to check validity and reliability. But in your stage in undergraduate research, we do not go that much deep into validity and reliability, but up to some extent you can report. Up to some extent you can report. Right. So as it is mentioned in this particular slide, you can see when it comes to the measurement instruments, validity simply means that the ability of the instrument to measure what it is intended to measure. So if you are preparing a questionnaire to measure the customer satisfaction, it should measure the customer satisfaction. If you are preparing a questionnaire to measure the perception of investors towards the Colombo Stock Exchange, it should measure exactly that, not anything else, not more, not less. If we are preparing a questionnaire to measure the stress level of the employees, it should measure the stress level of the employees. So that is basically validity. As I mentioned, the validity is accuracy. The instrument should measure what it is intended to measure. And at the same time, reliability is the if the research instrument is consistent and stable. If you do the same research again and again, do we get the same results? So therefore, hence the predicted values are accurate. So that is reliable. So there are ways and means that we can make sure that our instrument is reliable. For that, people normally conduct a pilot survey, so that in order to ensure the reliability and validity of the instrument that we are dealing with. But that also, if you want, you can do, but we are not suggesting that to you. But anyway, there are some criterion, or let's say some benchmarks that you can use to convince the reader that our instrument is good and it is reliable and it has a validity. So to do that, I have given you several criterions here. First one is convergent validity, then we have discriminant validity, then we have composite reliability and internal consistency reliability. So let me go one by one. Let me explain what exactly this is. So these are the things that you should report, right? You know that we have already mentioned something about validity and reliability in the methodology chapter, because in the methodology chapter, that is basically chapter 3, you have to mention that these are the validity measures, these are the reliability measures that we are going to use to check the validity and reliability of our data set. Now, since we are at the results section at the moment, so this is where we should present and describe that data. So first, let me go into convergent validity then, right? So here we are talking about the convergent, right? So there should be a sort of correspondent or conversion between similar construct. Now, you have already gone through your research and you have already developed a conceptual framework. You know, you have several construct variables, concepts in your research conceptual framework. So, and you know that when you are developing a questionnaire, you develop several questions in order to measure one variable, or maybe let's say one construct, right? So all these questions that you are asking should converge into the same idea, the same construct. For example, if you are measuring, let's say, the adoption of the online banking, if you are asking several questions, like, let's say you ask 5 questions, so all these 5 questions should be directed towards the adaptation of online banking. So those things need to have some common direction. So that is called convergent, right? So the convergent validity can be proven when each measurement item correlates strongly with each other. So what we do is we can measure the convergent validity by calculating something called average variance extracted, AVE. But Now, some of you may have done a fact analysis for your research. Some of you may have not. So the people who have done the fact analysis can calculate the AVE. It's very easy procedure. So you can, if you have already run your fact analysis in your research, right? You can ask your supervisor about the average variance extracted and how you should calculate it. Even you can search it online. It's a very easy formula that you should apply. The calculation is done based on the factor values, right? So let me show you how you should present this sort of data. So the convergent validity, here you can see the tables for 4.16 AV and the factor loadings of the constructs are presented here. Now you can see we have several constructs like, wealth creating capacity, immortality, fast money, market regulation, economic bellwether, tilt playing field, monitoring enforcement, like, there are several constructs here. So you can see that we have calculated the AVE, average variance extracted. So if this AVE should be more than 5 to consider it has a good convergence. It has a good convergence. And the construct factor loading should be more than 7 so that we can, again, it evidences that the convergent validity is good if it is more than 7, the construct factor loading. So this way you can present your convergent validity, but don't worry about this. Everyone else of you we are not asking you to present this sort of data. So people who have conducted, or people who are trying to do a fact analysis and going to your sort of inferential analysis next, then if you have already conducted, or if you are planning to conduct a fact analysis, you can use this. Otherwise, don't worry about this. All right. So this is one of the methods that you can ensure your convergent validity. All right. So that's one thing. Then moving into the next one, that is discriminant validity. Now, for example, if you remember now, convergent validity is actually whether all these question in one variable is corresponding towards them, whether it has a high correlation towards within or among them. The discriminant validity, you know that in your conceptual framework, we have several variables, several constructs. So discriminant validity is shown when each measurement item correlates weakly with all other constructs. For example, let's say we have construct A and construct B. Convergent validity simply measures whether the measurements, like questions in the construct A measures the construct A. That means within them whether they have high correlation. The discriminant validity measures that the questions in the construct A and questions in the construct B are whether they are weakly related. They should be, because those two belongs to two separate constructs. If the questions under one construct is highly correlated with the questions in another construct or variable for that matter, it shows that there is a less validity when it comes to the discriminant validity. So the discriminant validity can be established when we calculate the correlation of each variable with the measurement. So let's say if we have several variables, like for example 5 variable in our research, so what we have to do is we have to test it for the correlation. Then we can check whether whether we have high amount of highly correlated variables one to each other, right? So another way that we can look at the discriminant validities, we can like I mentioned here, you can sort of present this sort of a correlation matrix and EVE. So EVE here is actually in this diagonal, you can see all these values should be the EVE, that is AVE, average variance extracted, we calculated, and all the other values are actually correlation value. You can see in the footnote, you can see diagonals are square rooted AVE. So if you remember, we calculated average variance extracted by in order to establish convergent validity. Now here we can use the same criterion here or the same calculation in order to establish the discriminant validity also. So what we can see here is, now you can see all the values in the diagonal. You can see they are much higher than the values of diagonal. Of diagonal values are like, so WCCIUMA is 3, and -0, 2, 3. The highest one here you can find is actually this 448. All these values are well below the AVE value. So AVE values are like, more than 7. You can see every other value. This one is 8. So those values are more than 7, but every other off diagonal values are less than 5. So it evidences that we have a good discriminant validity. Again, don't worry about this validity if you are not going to run a factor analysis in your study, right? So that keep in your mind. So people who really want to run a factor analysis have to think about that. Then we are coming into another one, which is called composite reliability. So under composite reliability, it can be defined as the total amount of true score variance in relation to the total score variance. So this can be again established, it estimate the extent to which a set of latent construct indicate share their measurement in the construct. So this is more like, this can be evident or this can be established through, as I mentioned, AVE and composite reliability calculation. So this composite reliability also can be calculated using factor loadings. So in case if you are running factor analysis, you can also calculate the composite reliability. The detail of that I am not going to discuss here, because here today our aim is to just to show you how to write the discussion. The results chapter and the discussion chapter, or the results and discussion chapter. So not to do any analysis. So these things should come under analysis, but these things are not actually required by the university. But in case if you are doing, as I mentioned, factor analysis, you can run all these things. You can report these things so that it will increase the reliability and validity as well as the rigor of your report, right? So that's the main idea here. So we were discussing about reliability and validity, and about the composite reliability. So then let me move into the next one, that is internal consistency reliability. But keep in mind, this is like, something that we require from you. So every one of you should give this or should establish this internal consistency reliability. So the composite reliability sort of thing, we define that the total amount of true score variance in the relationship. So internal consistency reliability is actually can be measured through what you call Conbatch alpha. So you can see the Conbatch alpha values are presented here. Now you can see several constructs are presented. WCC, IM, immortality, the same constructs I present earlier. You can see the Conbatch alpha values here. If the values are higher than 7, generally we say we can confidently say that the internal consistency of the instrument is good. You can see the number of items. Number of items here corresponding to the number of questions actually. So there are 5 questions under WCC, 5 questions under IMO, 4 questions under all other, and another 3 questions under MET. So these are the number of questions under each variable. So this is the converge alpha value for each variable. So this way you can present your converge alpha table like this, so that you can sort of establish your internal consistency, reliability of your instrument. But this is something we require from every one of you. So all of you need to sort of include this particular table in your research under the results chapter. So all the other things that we discussed earlier, like, you know, other convergent validity, discriminant validity, composite reliability, and all those things are optional for the people who are who actually keen on running their fact analysis. So without running the fact analysis, you cannot measure those validity, and you cannot establish them. So you need to do the fact analysis. That is a prerequisite for that, because without having factor loading, you cannot calculate all these things. But internal consistency, reliability, the converge alpha value, you can easily calculate through SPSS or whatever the software you are using, whether is it JASP or the SPSS. There are several softwares you can use. Open source softwares are also there. I hope that you will have you will have joined to the previous session that we discussed about analysis methods and all those softwares. So hopefully they during those sessions they might have discussed about the converge alpha calculation. It's just, you know, you can get the output from the SPSS, so that you can report that internal consistency, reliability like this way in a table. You have to present your converge alpha values for each and every variable, including independent, dependent, mediate, moderate, whatever the variable you have, along with the number of items corresponding to each variable, this way, right? So that is the minimum expectation from you under the reliability. If you want, you can present other things if you are keen on running fact analysis. So that's the basic idea when it comes to validity and reliability.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
So if we get a Cronbach alpha between 0.6 and 0.7, do we have to do a factor analysis?
No. Fact, why we do a factor analysis is basically to look to see whether all the questions are sort of moving towards each and, like, you know, for example, imagine that now just take example, same example that I have presented here. Now you can see under internal consistency, reliability, I have given several constructs. Okay, so first one, let's say first one is wealth creating capacity, that is the variable. So the converge alpha value is 0.859. That means that there is an internal consistency, reliability. What it actually does is it creates subsets of the subset of the data and create values, and then they run correlation against each and every subset. So then they calculate the weighted average correlation and all that. So then you get, it's more like a correlation value. So converge alpha value really says, what it says is actually whether all the items in a particular construct, like, you know, here we have 5 items, whether they are highly correlated among them or not. If they are highly correlated among them, that means that this particular variable is reliable, consistent. If you measure it again, probably you are going to get the same sort of answers. So that's the idea. So that is the reliability. It is all about consistency. And question you ask is about factor analysis. Why we do factor analysis is just to check the convergence. It's basically the other side of the coin, the validity part. So whether all these questions that we ask are actually measuring the same thing, whether they are going in the same direction, whether they converge into the same variable that they're supposed to do. So the factor analysis is what you normally measure, what you normally run when you are doing a research with these attitudinal scales, like Likert scale questionnaires, because we need to establish the validity, right? So that's why we normally tend to run a factor analysis. When it comes to factor analysis also, there are two ways that we can do. First one is we can go for exploratory factor analysis, or we can go for a confirmatory factor analysis. So the difference between explanatory and confirmatory is, now this one is more towards explanatory. So for example, let's say that you have 20 odd question, then you need to break those questions down into several constructs or variables. So then you can go for explanatory factor analysis and identify what are the questions that are going in hand with each other. So then you can cluster those questions into several variables. So that's the basic purpose of the explanatory factor analysis. Then the confirmatory factor analysis is where why we use them just to confirm. Now let's say we have pre-constructed all those variables and construct, then we need to test in our context once we collect the data whether that is true in our context, whether all these pre-constructed items like questions are actually measuring the same thing that it intended to measure. So that sort of thing is measured through the internal confirmatory factor analysis. So factor analysis is not something that we require. It's not something that is mandatory when it comes to your undergraduate research. So people, if you want, you can do it. It will improve the quality of the research definitely, but you can get away with just with the Cronbach alpha values in this at least in this stage at the undergraduate level. The mandatory one is actually reliability analysis. Basically, for the what we are calculating here is internal consistency reliability, and we calculate the Cronbach alpha. So I hope that you get the answer.
Yes, sir. But sir, in case if our reliability, if our Cronbach alpha is between 0.6 and 0.7, can we proceed with the analysis?
Yeah, of course, there are some other. It depends. Now there are some authors arguing that you could even accept Cronbach alpha higher than 6 also. There are some citations that you can use to prove that. There are scholars who believes that a Cronbach alpha value more than 6 is also okay. So there are some other literature that mentioning that it should be more than 7. There are some actually mentioning that it should be more than 8. There are some scholars who are arguing if the Cronbach alpha value is 9, it is quite artificial for a social science research. It cannot happen. So therefore, it is again something that is not reliable also. There are different sort of arguments in this field, but generally accepted one is actually 0.7. That is the mostly cited one, but 0.6 is okay. Normally, now if we have every other variable in the conceptual framework is more than 7, and there's just one variable 0.6, probably we can get away with it. No worries. Okay.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Right. So that is basically validity and reliability. So as I mentioned,
Yes, sir.
yes.
So to conduct this reliability, so we should do a pilot test.
No, that's what I mentioned now. Normally, we actually the way that we should do is actually before we go into the main data analysis or main survey, we first should do a pilot check, pilot analysis, or the pilot survey, like for about, let's say we are going to go for 150 for the sample. So what we do is we just distribute our questionnaire for 25 people and collect the data, and we first run the converge alpha values and check whether the instrument is internally reliable or not. So that is the accepted way of doing. But here at this stage, we would not expect that from you. If you want, you can do. But anyway, if you want, you can do it now also. You can just take first 25 respondent and do it. But the main idea here is just because sometimes now, as I mentioned now, if you do not get these values, like 0.8, 0. Something like those values in the analysis itself, we have some sort of a way so that we can increase this converge alpha value by removing these items. For example, now when you run this internal consistent reliability, when you are running this converge alpha analysis on SPSS, we can get something called the value if the item deleted. So when you look at that, if you delete one or two items, sometimes you can increase the converge alpha value. So that treatment should be done before you go into the main survey, but it is not something that we expect from you at this stage. But you can run the converge alpha analysis for a total sample, like total survey. Then you can report the whatever the conclusion you get, like the output of the analysis, like this. So there are ways and means of increasing, as I mentioned, though, improving the converge alpha value. So for those things, I think it's good if you can discuss that with your supervisor, so that along with your own output, because it depends on your research, depends on the number of items you have, it depends on your sample. So there are a lot of other variables that we have to think about when we are thinking about this reliability and validity. So basically, in the results chapter, what you should know, first we were discussing about you should give a sort of introduction. Then we discussed that after that you should give demographic information of your sample. Then we move into the reliability validity part. So under reliability validity part, people who are really going to run factor analysis, you can also provide those validity measurements also, like convergent, composite, and discriminant validity. But even composite reliability values also. But for others, you can get away with just presenting converge alpha values. So converge alpha value is actually the benchmark. Everyone should provide that. More than that, if you want to go more than that, it's up to you to decide. So everyone should give converge alpha values, right? So that's the idea. So let me move into the next part, where we are going to discuss about this descriptive statistics. So we provided the introduction, then we discussed about the sample demographics, then we discussed about reliability and validity. Now we are coming into the descriptive statistics, right? So this presentation of the descriptive statistics, the topic itself, the word itself suggests the action, like what we are going to do is we are going to describe the data. We are going to describe the data, and to describe the data, we can use some measurements that are available in the statistics, right? Like this. Now, I have mentioned several measurements like mean, median, mode, range, variance, standard deviation, skewness. All these uh, measurements you can use to describe your data, describe the data that you have collected, right? So what we do, what this descriptive statistics are there to actually understand the what sort of data that we are dealing, right? Because now we have already laid the foundation in the uh, you know previous three sections, like we discussed we give an introduction, we discussed the demographics, and we established the reliability and validity. Now we are coming into the part where we are trying to describe our data, right? So here the mean value is, we all know that. I'm not going to explain that. I'm not going to take much time to explain these statistical measurements, like, but just going through mean value, normally what we do is it's basically the mathematical average of range of numbers. Like range of numbers is basically what we collect as quantitative data. So you get the mean value. That means it's basically mathematical or the arithmetic average, right? Median is the midpoint of range of numbers. If you rearrange the data in whatever the order, A to Z or Z to A, whatever it is. Mod is actually basically the most commonly repeated number among the data. I mean, within the set of data. So the range is, if you rearrange the data, like in order, what sort of range we have. That's the difference between highest value and the lowest value, right? So the one of the most important thing here is actually standard deviation. Again, normally we report mean values along with the standard deviation, because standard deviation, it sort of indicate how depressed a range of number is. Like in other words, how close the numbers are to the mean. Around the mean, how depressed the numbers are. So when you report the mean, you should always report the standard deviation, because those two go very close, mean and standard deviation, right? Skewness also, it indicates how symmetric the range of number is. In other words, it tend whether how it tend to cluster, whether is it a smooth bell curve, or whether it is skewed towards right or left. I think you all know these uh, statistical measurements. Some of them we call them central. Basically, we have two: central tendency measurements and variability measurements. So mean, median, mode are actually central tendency measurements. So range, variance, standard deviation are variability measurements. Skewness is basically to measure the distribution, like whether it is skewed towards right or left, or maybe whether it is a normal distribution like smooth bell curve, right? So I will show you an example of how you should present this sort of data. Now you can see all the construct or the variables are here, and minimum values and maximum values. The difference between these two is actually considered as the range. So the mean value is presented and standard deviation is presented. So it depends what are the things you should present, but this is quite enough for a attitudinal scale research. So if you can present minimum, maximums, mean values, and standard deviation. If you want, you can provide skewness also, but this is quite enough. So you can see the way the table is presented. The way that this is presented is also, I want to make a point here. Now here I have adapted APA style to present the tables. So you also have to do it. So this is the way that you should present a table according to the APA style. APA is basically American Psychological Association style. So you can see how the table is formatted and how it is labeled, and what are the footnotes and titles and all that you can see. So this way you can present your descriptive statistics, right? So we discussed about descriptive statistics, then moving into the next important thing, that is the inferential statistics. Right. So inferential statistics are the actually most important thing, because this is where we are going to sort of address our hypothesis. Right. So inferential statistics is the branch of statistics that makes the use of various analytical tools to draw inferences about the population. That means we create hypotheses and we test hypotheses, and then we claim that the tested hypothesis also valid for the sort of population, right? So the difference between inferential statistics and the descriptive statistics is actually is that. So the inferential is normally we test the sample and we normally claim something about the population. We test the sample, then we get a conclusion and we apply that conclusion to the total population. But descriptive statistics is only there to describe the sample, not the population. Sorry. So when it comes to inferential statistics, normally we discussed about compare measurements with benchmark values, or maybe then compare measurements with between groups and relationships. So those are the things we are normally interested at when it comes to inferential statistics, especially when it comes to research area. So let me give you two most commonly used inferential statistics. First one is correlation analysis. I hope that you all learn how to run this during the previous session. So this is how you should sort of present it. So this is called a correlation matrix. This is also presented based on the American Psychological Association style, APA style. So you can see all these variables like, satisfaction, efficiency, reliability, responsiveness. Same variables are here in this area. So you can see the diagonal, all the diagonal values are 1, because it's basically the correlation to each correlation with the same variables. It should be always 1. So all the off diagonal values are here. You can see it represents the correlation values each other. These asterisk marks represent whether the value is actually significant or not. The double asterisk means it is significant at 1% level. If you have a single asterisk, that means it is significant at 5% level. So this is basically what you should do once you run your correlation analysis. You have to present it like this, and as I mentioned earlier, whatever the infographics you present, whatever the table, whatever the pie chart, bar chart, whatever it is, you have to sort of describe it. Remember, describe, not to interpret, describe it. So there is another one, most popular one, regression analysis. People use, I think almost all of you are going to use a regression analysis. This is how you should sort of present the regression analysis. Like you can see all the variables: efficiency, reliability, responsiveness, fulfillment, and the parameter coefficient is there. Standard error, t values, significant values, and R2 is basically what we call explanatory variable, right? Explanatory variable. So that should also be presented like this. So all these things, all these values can be extracted from the output of the SPSS analysis for the regression. So I hope that you will learn it. So based on these parameter coefficients, you can see what sort of beta value you are getting for each and every variable. And the significant values are there to verify them, whether we are going to accept it as it is, like whether we are going to accept the particular hypothesis. Now, you can see the hypothesis here is now, here the dependent variable is basically satisfaction. So this regression, we have regressed the satisfaction against efficiency, reliability, responsiveness, fulfillment, and privacy. So these are considered as independent variables. So dependent variable should be satisfaction. So this parameter, for example, this means that the relationship between the beta value is 0.221. So that means if you increase the efficiency by 1, That means your satisfaction is going to increase by 0.227. For example, if you are going to increase this by 100%, satisfaction will be increased by 20%, 22% for that matter. So the significant value, you know, the something we call p-value. If this value is more than less than 0.05, you can safely believe or safely accept the hypothesis. You can see this one can be accepted. This can be accepted. This cannot be, but again, privacy can be accepted, because those are the things that you should report. I think you learn about what you should do, how you are going to get this sort of output. But here, what we are more focused on, what you should present and how you should present it. So this is the way that you should present a regression analysis. I hope that you got the idea here. Right, so that's all about inferential statistics. Then the next section that you should do is hypothesis testing. You know that you already set all the hypotheses in the methodology chapter, because there you have presented your conceptual framework and operationalization table. After that, you define your hypothesis. So in the hypothesis testing section of your results, what you should do is first you bring your all the hypothesis from the methodology chapter. You mention the hypothesis, and then you have to mention whether you are going to reject it or accept it, and on which base you are going to reject it or accept it, right? So since normally what would happen is you are going to reject a hypothesis or accept a hypothesis based on your regression analysis, mostly not based on the correlation analysis. Most of you are going to do it on multiple regression analysis. So what you can do is what you can report here is, according to the multiple regression analysis, this hypothesis is accepted, this one is rejected, this one is accepted, this is the p-value and this is the beta value. Likewise, you can report under this part, right? So that is hypothesis testing. And the last one is actually concluding summary. So you have to provide, it's not a big summary like we are expecting, just to highlight the key points in the results section, right? Just to highlight the key points. This is actually very important, right? So we have to keep it simple, very simple. But just to remind, just to give the reader about, just to give the impression of the impression to the reader about the key findings of the key result, or whatever the key idea of the chapter, right? So that's the idea. Again, do not provide lengthy paragraph as the concluding summary. It should be very short and brief one, just to give the key takeaway of the results section. So that's the idea. So, and then we can wrap it up, so that at that point you can get away with your, you know, what you call results chapter. So this is how you should sort of structure your results chapter. So let me recap the things that we discussed. So the results chapter should start with the introduction. Then you should provide a sample demographics. Then go for reliability and validity. Then present this descriptive statistics. After that, you can present inferential statistics. After that, you can present the testing of your hypothesis. You can present the hypothesis and state whether you are going, what are the things you are going to reject, or what are the things you are going to accept. Then you can provide very small, brief, concluding summary for the section. So that's how you should go and write your results chapter of your quantitative analysis or quantitative research. So that's the idea. So before we go into the qualitative part, so let me open up this for you. So if you have any questions about quantitative part, So this could be the best time for you to ask, because again I need some feedback from you. If we have anyone who is doing a qualitative research, so that we can discuss about little in detail. But if not, I'm going to skip through it. So any questions, any clarification, anything I should clarify more, or if you have any other questions related to the research, you can ask it right now.
So can I know from all these 7 topics that we discussed now for the quantitative, what are the topics that we have to mainly have more content on?
You are talking about all these topics like introductions, sample, demographics. So what do you mean by content? Is it
Like like we have word limit also for
yeah.
this chapter. Yeah.
So word limit, normally introduction should be a very small one, 2 or probably a 2 paragraphs. Concluding summary should be very small, 2 paragraphs. So you should spend more on inferential statistics and descriptive statistics. Hypothesis testing is just reporting the hypothesis and mentioning that whether you are going to accept it or not, and based on which analysis you are going to do it. Validity reliability could be little lengthier, but it depends. The people who have conducted, or people who want to conduct a fact analysis, it might take some space. But if you are just doing the internal consistency reliability, like if you are just running the Converge alpha and reporting it, it won't take that much of space there also. So you should spend more time on descriptives and inferential statistics. And other things, as it whatever the requirement it is, you can do it. There are no right, like rules for that. If the research requires, and if it requires for you to explain that, you should explain it. It depends. And again, it depends on the sort of conclusion, I mean sort of results you are getting, sort of findings you are getting, sort of the research you are doing. Sometimes for some person it could be a 2-3 pages maybe. Sometimes it may be 10 pages, sometimes it may be 20 pages. So it depends largely on what you are doing and the nature of the research. But on average, you can get away with it around 10 pages. Like you have to present all those things, describe each and every table you are presenting. You have to describe your descriptives, variables and all that, and you have to describe your demographics. When you do it, it takes time, and it takes space also. Anything else? Any other questions?
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
So can you elaborate on the part where we have to compare our findings with the previous literature?
Yeah, that comes next, because it comes in the discussion part. Yes. So is there anyone who's doing qualitative research? Nobody's doing it. But anyway, let me skip through it. Right. So if you are doing a qualitative research, so these are the things that I have structured for you. So we are going to think about discuss something about what exactly is qualitative research, and what are things that you should write there, and structure of the results. So first, what exactly is the qualitative data? I think we have already discussed about this. So you know that qualitative data refers to basically it's not about numbers. So it is about text, videos, interview transcripts, documents, it could be open-ended survey responses, like, could be images, recordings, anything. So qualitative research normally investigate the softer side of the things to explore and describe, not just numbers, and deep meaning. And it connects to the people thing. We sort of consider about the feelings and all that, emotions of the data. So that basically what we want to think about when we are doing a qualitative sort of analysis. So I'm not going to take much time here, since we do not have anyone who is doing qualitative research. So, but anyway, for the sake of understanding, I would go through this. Yeah.
Excuse, I
Yes.
am doing a qualitative one.
Yeah, you're doing it. So then let me take some more time. Right. Okay. Anyway, so
And give me 1 minute. I just want to know whether we have to include a question in this, in the qualitative question.
no, you can't. You can do a qualitative research with a questionnaire, but it should be like, it shouldn't be close-ended question. It has to be open-ended questions. Otherwise, it's quite difficult for you to capture the richness of the data and report it as a qualitative analysis. If you ask some close-ended question which has predetermined answers, it will never become a good qualitative analysis. But the best way, but to capture the richness, to capture the best qualitative data, it's good if you can go for, like, interviews, or maybe brainstorming sessions, like, observations and discussion sort of method, rather than going into questionnaires with close-ended question. But open-ended question you can get, but still people are not going to write down those things, but rather they might talk about it rather than that. So therefore, the best way is to just to go for at least maybe structured or unstructured interviews, or maybe brainstorming sessions. I think it's the good way.
That is better to go with the interviews, no?
Yeah, of course. In this case, now, if you are doing a qualitative research, so what you should include in the research chapter is basically you have to talk about analysis finding and whether they support your hypothesis, if you have any. So most of the time, qualitative researchers do not have hypothesis, but some
hypothesis I have not included because my supervisor told not to include hypothesis.
Yeah, of course.
That area, those things.
Yes, some might have hypothesis, some may not have hypothesis. It depends on the study you do, but most of them do not have hypothesis, right? So as I mentioned, neutrally, the exact content of the research chapter will depend on, as I mentioned earlier, you have to, whatever the things that you report, you have to report it neutrally and objectively. But as I mentioned earlier, also now research, since it's research chapter, it depends on whatever the methods that you use primarily, because through the method only you get the results. So you have to report on the results. So let me discuss about some of the qualitative methods here. So I have sort of included mostly used methods. There are other methods here, but I have just put 5 methods that I thought that some of you might use in your qualitative data analysis. So let me go through one by one. The first one that I'm going to discuss is content analysis. The word itself suggests the meaning. So the content analysis is basically used to evaluate the patterns within the piece of content. Like it could be newspapers, it could be interview transcripts, it could be magazines, it could be tweets, it could be Facebook message, it could be web post, whatever it is. What we do is we go through the data and try to find out patterns, try to find out same phrases, try to find out same meanings, same words how many times those words or those phrases are being mentioned or speak or maybe interpreted in the data. So that's basically it. So it's like, we are searching for contents in a text, for example. So we have to work with large amount of text, and we have to code them and summarize them into several categories. Sometimes even we have to tabulate them also. This gives you sort of a little taste of a quantitative analysis also, because sometimes when it comes to content analysis, people tend to provide frequency tables as well. Now, how frequent those phrases are being mentioned in the interview transcript, something like that. So that sort of analysis, we call them content analysis. But let me educate you on this qualitative research analysis. But the quality of the analysis, the way the analysis is being conducted, is purely depend on the person who is doing the analysis, not like the quantitative ones. Because if you are doing a quantitative analysis, probably you would have a software, and there are protocols, there are methods that you should use, and all that is already laid out. But when it comes to qualitative analysis, the analysis is being done by you. You are the analyzer, and you are the data collector. You are the instrument also. So you are the one who is reporting on that as well. So it depends on the skills of the person who is doing the analysis. And so therefore, we cannot exactly say the content analysis should look like this. But what we can say is, this is what we are expecting if you are going to do a content analysis, so that sort of thing. So the next analysis method that I would want to discuss is narrative analysis. So narrative analysis is best suited when you are discussing, or when you want to explain something related to the stories, like, just not the story, but the way that the story is being told, right? So something like that. If the context is so important, you can use it. Now, I have given several examples here. For example, now, narrative of a prisoner trying to justify his or her crime could provide insight into their view of world of the justice system, all that. So if you want to interview an entrepreneur, if he talks about the struggle in his career, so in the context of that narrative, so the cultural background, what he has to go through when he's developing his business, the way that story is being told is important. If that is the case, if that is one of your purpose in your research, narrative analysis is suitable for you, right? So obviously, just like quantitative analysis, any qualitative analysis method also has its own advantage as well as own disadvantages. So one of the inherent disadvantage of the qualitative research is it limited sample size. We cannot go for higher samples because it takes so much time and so much energy to collect data. So therefore, normally qualitative research are limited in sample. So therefore, lacking generalizability. So that's the inherent problem of the qualitative research, right? So and again, another thing is, it's quite difficult to reproduce if you are thinking about the reliability part, because it's basically a narrative, because the way that the story is being told sometimes may be different from one person to another person, or maybe one incident to another incident. So therefore, this narrative analysis is highly contextualized, and it roots into the culture and the society at that time, and all that is there. So that's the another drawback when it comes to qualitative research specifically, is that researchers, the person who is doing the research, if you are the person who is doing the research, your biasness towards the matter at hand also influence your conclusion, your results, your analysis. So that's because you are the one who's doing the analysis, you are the analyzer. Everything is done by the person when it comes to qualitative research. So that's basically narrative analysis. So I'm not going to, this is not a presentation, or this is not not the time to discuss how to do a qualitative analysis, but I am just mentioning these are the methods that you can use, right? So it's a different story that if you want to learn how to do qualitative analysis, but that part you have to get it done from the supervisor. But here what I mentioned is there are several analysis methods you can use so that you can use them in the discussion, sorry, results chapter. Then we have discourse analysis. If you want to understand, discourse is basically simply a fancy word to written spoken language, or maybe the debate. It's all about analyzing language within, its social context, and other words, maybe analyzing the language such as conversation, speech, etc., within the culture and the society it takes. Like, sometimes, by looking at, we can understand the culture, history, or power, or maybe dynamics, and how it has an impact on the concepts that the people are spoken about. Like, for example, think about a janitor, a person who is cleaning the place. The way he speaks to the CEO of the company, like the way the cleaner speaks to the CEO of the company, if he speaks freely, that gives us a sense about, what are the policies about the equality within the company, how it's been practiced within the company, equality, and levels, layers, and all that. If the cleaner is so fear of CEO, if he is not going to talk to him face to face, that means it gives us sort of idea about the context, power, and dynamics of the context. So if that is important for you as a qualitative researcher, if it is important to capture that part of the data, you can go for this discourse analysis. So you can use that. And the next one that I want to talk about is thematic analysis. This is the one that has been used by most of the qualitative research. I think most popular analysis method among qualitative researchers is this thematic analysis. So pretty much what you do is you go through the set of data, probably let's say interview transcripts you have. So you try to identify similarities within the transcripts, and which we call them themes. So once it is identified, you have to sort of establish the theme using the triangulation methods, like you using quotes, direct quotes from your interview transcripts. So thematic analysis is very useful when you need to find out about people's perception towards something, about their experience, about their view of the world, like something like that. If you want to capture that sort of data, I think you can go with thematic analysis. So those are the types of analysis you can use. There's another one that we can use, that is grounded theory. So grounded theory is completely a different sort of approach towards qualitative sort of data, because what we are looking at here is actually sort of theory building. So we go to the society, or we go to the world, and we are trying to understand what is going on, or what's going around us, trying to explain a certain phenomenon. So what we do is we look at the world without having predetermined assumption, and then try to build it up from ground. So that's basically grounded theory. So here I have given an example. So if you could try to develop a theory about factors influencing students to watch videos about quantitative analysis, so qualitative analysis. So same thing that we do.
So excuse me, I
Yes.
have already taken a theory, the domino theory.
Yes,
Yes.
yes, of course. So no, grounded theory we normally use when we do not have a theory. So if we need to develop a theory, we can use the ground theory. I have given sort of example now. If we are trying to develop a theory about factors influencing students to watch video about qualitative analysis, so what you should do is whether you should go and observe what is happening. So then you can talk to several students. Let's say you select 5 students and talk to them, then ask them why, when you are going to watch them. So let's say if they say when we have a test we are going to look at them, when we are submitting our research we need to look at those videos. Likewise the factors they might have mentioned. Then what you can do is you have a basic idea about that, then you take that idea and then go and test again with some other people, then retest it again and then redo it again and develop it little by little. Then it would be developed into at the end it would be developed into a theory. So that's the case. So as I mentioned here, if you go through the last point here, you can see some do argue that that's a tricky circular to grounded theory because of the fact that it is believed that if you have a little as much as little knowledge about the problem at hand, it's good, because without having a knowledge, if you can go to the phenomenon, if you can observe it and if you can get the idea without having predetermined understanding about the phenomenon. But the problem is because it will reduce the biasness of our assessment. But the problem is when it comes to research, it is also believed that you should have the previous encounter. You should know all the previous encounter of the issue also. That's why we are going to do a literature analysis. That's why we are going to review literature and try to find out what are the previous scholars have proposed to understand that sort of phenomenon that we are working on. So therefore, it's sort of like, chicken or egg sort of a situation, which come first and all that. But that is it. Qualitative analysis is something like that. So anyone can argue, anyone can break the argument like that. So that's the beauty of qualitative analysis. So you can use qualitative analysis to draw very good conclusion. So those are the sort of analysis methods that you can use. I thought that people might use. There are some other methods, but these 5 methods I would think that people might use, most popular ones. So that's why I mentioned here. So coming back to the problem we at hand, so the structure of the results chapter should look like this. So it should go by like, it should have an introduction, body and conclusion. So introduction chapter, mostly you should have, as I mentioned earlier, same as the quantitative one. So you have to remind the reader about the purpose and the objective and specific aim of the research in this stage. So in order to retain the interest of the reader about the chapter. So that's basically it doesn't whether it is quantitative or qualitative or whatever it is, introduction part is the introduction part. So there you have to mention your problem, your specific research questions, objectives, and then you should give sort of a structure what you are going to present in this chapter. So after that, once it is done, you have to sort of establish what sort of outline or the structure that you are going to adapt in this results section or the results chapter, so that it will give the reader about the basic roadmap, what he or she should expect in coming pages. Likewise. Okay, so that's the case. Same as earlier, you should not interpret data. It is paramount important, especially when it comes to the qualitative analysis. You should not interpret data at this stage because you are still in the result stage, just presenting and describing the data. That's all, or the findings, right? So as I mentioned earlier, introduction section should not be lengthy ones. It should be, I mean, 1 or 2 paragraphs is more than enough. So what you should give is actually the reader a reminder of what we have been doing. So what is the purpose, why we are doing it, what sort of objectives we have, what are the methodology we followed and all that, and what is the structure of this particular section that we are going to read, and everything else. A very brief manner we have to provide to the reader. So that's the introduction part. So then we have body section, that is basically the base chunk of the that is where basic analysis part is being reported. So what we have to do is we have to present the key and the relevant finding from your qualitative data analysis, whether it is thematic, grounded, narrative, whatever it is disclosed. You have to provide the findings. So when you are providing, when you are reporting data, you can use your objectives, your hypothesis, and maybe your questions as a filtering mechanism. So you have to decide what is relevant, what is irrelevant, because you should only produce relevant ones. Otherwise, reader might go every corner, and he might get a wrong impression about your research, because we have to be careful here. You have to present only the information that is relevant to your research problem, your research question, and all, right? So again, another thing that you should follow, but not like quantitative, we cannot predetermine sort of structure you can follow, but you have to somehow follow a logical structure, right? A standardized logical structure, it depends on whatever the analysis method you use. If you are going to use thematic analysis, it depends. So you can structure it based on the themes that you are going to identify, and then you can propose a theme, then you can get some chords, and you can establish the claim, something like that. So if you are going to go ahead with the grounded theory, again, you have to propose, you have to line, and you have to structure it according to the analysis that you do. If you are going to do it based on the narrative analysis, so you can then identify the people narratives, and then you can report, you can structure it based on the narratives that you are reporting likewise. So it highly depend on the method that you use. So therefore we cannot just say that this is the structure, this is what you should follow. But only thing is, it has to be logical, it has to be consistent. So that's the idea. So those are the things that I wanted to mention under body section also. So all the things that I mentioned is also in this particular slide. It's important things to have some sort of logical and intuitive structure in place, so that reader might get not reader should not be confused, and he should not be fed up of reading what you are presenting here. It should be like, you should compel reader to read more on your research. So that's what you should do. Actually, writing a qualitative research is like, it's a scientific exercise, but there is art also. It is obviously, it is a scientific one, but you have to have you should possess the art of writing as well, with taking the argument, bringing up the argument, triangulating it with the evidences, like, nicely structure it, and follow through, create the flow, and so let the reader go through the flow, and so that he would compelled to read more and more. So just like writing a novel. So that's basically the body section. So there are 3 things that I want to mention here. Remember that the research chapter needs to be completely objective and descriptive, not interpretive. That I already mentioned about. So be careful not to use words like as suggest or implies, that they type of word usually accompany some sort of an interpretation. We should not use those words when it comes to the, especially in qualitative research, when it comes to the results chapter. Those words can be used in the discussion chapter, but not in the results chapter. So that's the idea about the body section. Then you can conclude it with the concluding summary, as I mentioned.
So, excuse me.
Yes.
What are the words that I can use in the
words like, I mean, words that give us a sense of interpretation, like, you know, it suggests that, implies that, that means a sort of a conclusive words like this. Don't use them in the body section, like, you know, especially in the results. It's just a description of the results, not the interpretation of the results. These words can be used in the discussion section, where when you are supposed to interpret it, right? Now data suggests that, it implies that when you say it suggests that, it sort of gives you the idea that you are making a conclusion out of that. Don't do that in the results section, right? Okay, so then concluding summary. So what we are supposed to do here, as I mentioned earlier, it doesn't matter whether you are doing quantitative, qualitative. Concluding summary is a concluding summary. So in the summary, what you have to mention about what you have been doing, and you have to mention key takeaway, key points that a reader should remember in the concluding summary, because this summary also pave the path towards the conclusion chapter. Because this summary paves the path towards to the discussion chapter, not to the conclusion chapter. Discussion is actually the next section, right? So after discussion only we have to go for the conclusion. So these are the things that you can think of when you are thinking about the concluding summary. So that's the basic idea. So structure should be introduction, body, concluding summaries. You know what exactly you have to write in introduction, what you should do in the concluding summary, what you have to mention in the body. So that's the idea. So moving ahead, then I have mentioned some tips here that you can take into account when you are doing a qualitative analysis, and if you want to, when you are doing your results section. So the first thing is your results chapter should be written in past tense. That is basically whatever it is, even though it is quantitative, qualitative, it doesn't matter. It should be written in past tense, because we have already conducted the analysis. So we are just presenting the data or whatever the information or maybe the findings. Then the second one is make sure that you review your work multiple times, very important, and check that every claim you make is adequately backed by evidences. Every argument you made, every claim you make in the, specifically when it comes to the results section. This is also applicable for all other sections also when it comes to research. Anything you claim, you have to back it up with some evidences, like, you know, you have to put citations to make the reader believe that you are not just though these are not just your ideas, but those are just evidences based argument, right? And the third one is make sure that you stick to only what is relevant. Very important point when it comes to research. I have seen that students are going round and round, but mentioning just, you know, irrelevant things in the research, so that it will make the reader uncomfortable, and it will make the reader like, you know, to not to read the content, because when you are presenting more irrelevant things in the specifically in the discussion, specifically in the results chapter. So do not waste time and the word count on data and analysis that are not tightly linked with your research aim and the objective and the research questions. So that's the third one. The fourth one is make sure you lay the data down to support all claims, right? You will make in your discussion section, right? So in the discussion sections, things that you want to discuss, interpret, everything, the data should be presented in the research section. So you cannot discuss anything that is not presented in the research section. So make sure everything you need, you present in the research section, right? Then remember you cannot discuss findings in the discussion section in here, the discussion sections that were not covered in the research section, right? So that you have to understand. So we can discuss the findings in the discussion, not in the research section. Very important thing. So use visually distinctive headings. That is also important, especially when it comes to qualitative results section. So you have to use set of subheadings, headings, and things that we can identify visually distinctive, in the sense the way it is formatted, font size, and all that you can use, so that we can differentiate each and every theme, or maybe narratives, whatever it is you are presenting. Right, so that's all about qualitative, what you should go through. What are the things that you should present in the results chapter, or maybe analysis chapter. Some might say it's analysis, some might say it's results, some might say it's finding, whatever it is. So those are the things that you should pay your attention when you are preparing your results section. So let us go to the next one, most important thing, that is discussion section. Discussion section. So in the discussion section, as I mentioned earlier, what we do is basically complete opposite of what we did in the results. In the results, we did not interpret, but here we interpret the results. So in your discussion chapter, you need to analyze, explore the meaning, and identify the importance of the data you presented in the results section. In the results section, you remember we just present and describe. Here what we do is we interpret, analyze it, and give a meaning for that. Give a meaning for that, right? So that's what we are supposed to do on discussion section. So we have to interpret it. So then it will turn into sort of information that will help us to answer our research questions, or it will help us to achieve our research aim, right? So again, it will pay the path towards to our conclusion chapter also, right? So that's the idea. So what we have to do is actually we have to interpret the core contents basically. So we have to address the research problem, not more, not less. So that's what we have to do, right? So discussion, under the discussion section, I don't have much to say, but I will give you some guide how you should write it, because discussion section of a research highly depend on that particular research, depend on the type of analysis you use, depend on the whether it is quantitative, qualitative, depend on the availability of the literature. Everything else counts. So, but I just give you some sort of a idea or the guideline, things that you should consider when you are preparing or when you are doing your discussion section. So the first thing is restate your research problem and objective. Very, 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 just like 2-3 lines, not to just, explain, just 2-3 lines, what exactly is you are going to do. And then overview of the key findings, like present the summary of the key findings from your study. It was basically there in the research section, but just a little summary, one paragraph, that's it. What exactly that we can we can get out of the main results. So there you can use the data suggests that the data supports or oppose the theory. The analysis concluded that it identifies that these sort of conclusive words you can use in this section, in the discussion section. So when you are reporting on your findings, right? So the last and but important thing about discussion section is again the middle part, that interpretation of the finding part. So this is where you unpack and interpret your findings and explain the meaning, and this is where you give a meaning for your results and connect the results into your context. So everything you discuss here needs to be rooted in the data chapter or in the research chapter. Everything you discuss here should be presented before in the previous chapter or the previous section where we discussed earlier, which is the what you call research chapter, right? So here what we do is we assess our findings and compare those findings with the existing research. So what we want to do here is actually communicate with the data, and we connect that data into the context, and we have to position our data in the existing body of knowledge where we are going to stand on, right? So that's why we connect our finding with the previous findings, and then we compare and contrast with them, right? So even our finding is not in line with others' findings previous people, authors or previous scholars, we have to report it, because that still we need to include these in the discussion. Sometimes those are the most important things, right? Places that we do not agree, places where we disagree, because from those things only you get more interesting outcomes. So even though your finding is in line with the existing literature, it's just you have to report it. So my finding is in line with this person and that person, and his context is something else, my one is something else. But when you have a disagreement, then you have something to say, you have something to prove, so then you can discuss upon it. So that then only interesting things comes to picture. So keep that in mind when you are interpreting it. So what you have to do is you have to, now this is where you connect everything. So this discussion chapter has a connection towards the results, because you are drawing it, you are drawing findings out of those results section. But here what you do is you connect it to the first chapter, that is first chapter where you have mentioned your questions, objectives. So in the discussion, what you mention is how you are, whether you have achieved your objectives and how you are going to answer your research question, right? Then again we are going to again create a link towards the second chapter, which is literature review. So literature review is where we review previous authors' work about the phenomenon at hand, the issue at hand. So what we do here in the discussion chapter is we create a connection to the literature review, where we are going to have a connection between our results and previous authors' results, right? So that is where we connect our result, our findings to the previous or previously available body of the knowledge. So that there we are going to create a connection between this first chapter and the second chapter, even with the third chapter, because with the methodological input that we can have here as a new research or maybe new knowledge created, new methodological invention sort of things we can discuss in the discussion chapter. So that's about the discussion chapter. We can go. Here I have mentioned few questions that will help you to guide your discussion section. So first things that you should ask yourself when you are doing your discussion chapter. Probably you would be better off if you ask this question yourself. So first one, you have to ask, how do your findings relate to those of previous studies? So when you are answering to that question, that means you are writing a discussion chapter or discussion section. So then second question, if your findings differ from those previous studies, why may this be the case? What are the reasons? Whether is it connected to the specific context that we are conducting research, or is it the culture? Is it something else, so that you can explain upon it? And the third one is, what do your finding contribute to your field of research? What sort of an impact we have created? What sort of impact that, what sort of contributions that we have uh, uh, created or we have done towards the existing body of knowledge? The last one, what other explanation could there be for your findings? What sort of things? Is there any other explanation, any other angle that you can look at the finding in different way? So when you ask those questions, when you are answering, then you answer those questions, probably you have your discussion chapter. Discussion chapter is not a big chapter. Sometimes it might be a 1 page, sometimes it might be 2 or maybe 3 maximum. It's not a big chapter. Some universities requires you to give you a different chapter, but in our case, it is part of the 4th chapter. So the 4th chapter is basically titled as results and discussion. So first you have to, first section of the 4th chapter, it should be dedicated to the results, and the next section it should be discussion. So this is how you structure your and outline your results and discussion chapter. I hope that you have some understanding about it. So we were supposed to stop the class at 10:15, but sorry, 10 p.m. But now it's 10:15. I took almost 15 minutes more. So that's it about this structure, and I think I can give you more 15 minutes if you have any questions about the research or whatever it is, even though about the program, anything else, because if you need to know anything, you can ask any questions. So the platform is open for you now.
So what you showed that is applicable for quantitative and qualitative both, or
Yeah,
for only for?
of course. The discussion is basically both for quantitative and qualitative. Whatever it is, the discussion is the discussion. So there you are interpreting your results, you are connecting your results towards the previous body of knowledge, and you are highlighting the new knowledge created, new contribution from your results, and you are trying to look at your results in different angle and try to explain what exactly it is. Now, for example, we have to explain now in the discussion, in the results chapter, we say that there's a relationship between this and that. But here we have to explain why there is a relationship. Even if you find out that there is no relationship, but the theory suggests that there is a relationship, that also you have to explain in the discussion chapter why there is no such relationship in this particular context. What is the sort of reason for that? So that is the even though you do a qualitative sort of approach or maybe quantitative approach, whatever it is, the discussion is the discussion. There you have to interpret your findings in relation to the previously available body of the knowledge. So that's the idea. So I hope you got some idea about how you should go and write your 4th chapter, right? The results and discussion chapter.